Hello and welcome to the Hytro Performance Podcast. And today I'm joined by Darren Burgess.
Cheers, Warren. Happy to be here.
And yeah, Darren, I'd love to hear a little bit for the listener, just a bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been around a while in the performance space. In AFL in Australia, I've worked with Port Adelaide, the Melbourne Demons, and now the Adelaide Crows, all in similar roles. My role at the moment is a bit more looking after the staff who look after the performance as general manager of performance. In football or soccer, I've worked for the Australian national team, the Socceroos, Liverpool in head of fitness and conditioning role, and Arsenal as a director of performance. My PhD was on talent identification and the application of technology to that. So, yeah, been around a while, and yeah, happy to be here though, and have a chat to you guys.
No, really appreciate that, Darren. It's interesting as well. We were speaking offline there about how your paths nearly crossed, Tom, with Darren. Do you want to talk very briefly about kind of what happened there?
Yeah, that's right. As Darren said, he was at Liverpool FC, which is where I did my PhD just before. So he left just before I started, and we were just talking. It was a very successful PhD program under the tutelage of Professor Barry Drust. Now potentially it's into its sixth, seventh, eighth generation. So yeah, we just missed each other though, Darren. But great to chat to you today.
Yeah, I remember when we arrived, we thought it was bizarre that we had such a close proximity, at least to John Moores, and so myself and Peter Brookner and Phil Coles, who arrived at sort of the same time, just went right. We're calling Josty straight away and trying to get something started, and it's been really successful, and I'm happy to see that it's still going. Just missed out on you though, Tom. So yeah, but I'm glad we catch up now.
Yeah, it's such a good facility, isn't it? They've got all the DEXA facilities, the physiology labs. Again, for context here, I was also LJMU alumni, which I think we all know, but having that link between Liverpool FC and LJMU was super cool for both parties, wasn't it?
For
Um, so,
sure.
so Darren, I'd love to ask a little bit about kind of this year with the Crows. You seem to be having a bit of a stronger year versus last year, and I want to know how important it is to set that tone early on, and carry that momentum through the season. Like, what mechanisms do you, or what do you do as a general manager of performance to set that tone in the team?
Yeah, if I knew I'd be able to apply it more often to any team, but essentially, I came here in at the end of 21, start of 22, and we tried to put together a resilience and robustness program. We were one of the youngest, if in fact we would have been the youngest team in 22. So we knew we didn't quite have the physical ability to compete in such a physical sport like AFL. So we put in place a whole bunch of simple but hopefully effective, I guess, mechanisms in terms of building player robustness, resilience, so that when the guys hit the age in which history shows in the AFL, you're able to compete for a full 4 quarters and for 23 games a year, they'd have the capability to do that. So although we had a pretty down year last year, we were on a decent trajectory, I should say. Probably didn't think we'd finish top of the league at the end of the minor rounds. So that was a pleasant surprise. But yeah, I guess from our point of view, it was getting the basics right in terms of training ridiculously hard and putting the players in uncomfortable situations often, recovering well, and doing the basics away from the training ground. So the nutrition, sleep, we put a lot of emphasis on recovery and sleep in particular. So yeah, there's nothing I'd love to say there was some secret sauce or anything like that, but it's a really good relationship between doctors, physios, performance staff, and crucially the coaches.
That's really interesting, isn't it, Darren? Because I think often when you see teams do perhaps a little bit unexpectedly better than perhaps they did last year, people do assume there's been big changes or there is that special sauce. But so are you just kind of saying that you were just afforded the time to let things bed in and for the process to take place, I suppose, which often in pro sport teams aren't afforded, are they?
Mm.
You just don't get that time, and the club was patient. They knew where they sat in the AFL, unlike in a lot of international sports. there's a draft system, and because we don't pay our players the exorbitant amounts that other draft systems, like NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, pay, there really is an emphasis on development. And perhaps that's why in sports like the AFL, the physical side of it is given a bit more kudos and a little bit more importance. Coaches don't travel around with their own team of physical performance people that go from club to club. The IP that is that's inherited by a coach in a club is valued, and with that comes a lot of accountability on the performance staff. So if things go wrong, and we've seen that this year at a couple of clubs where they've had high injury rates, and the performance staff have been removed pretty swiftly. So there is an accountability factor there, but there's also that really strong input into performance and the success of the team. So you feel like you own it a little bit more. So it's a double-edged sword in that way, but I'd rather that way and live or die by your decisions than not.
And as you say, AFL is a little bit like atypical, isn't it? I remember I went to a conference in Melbourne a few years ago and got to go to the MCG, what a place that is, and watch a game, and there's nothing like it, is there? It's mad. And you mentioned the season, the task that you're putting the players through week to week. Like, how do you balance that preparation, the recovery, the performance? Like, I know you said there's no secret sauce, but what's your kind of blueprint to that?
Well, we have a long pre-season, which, if I'm comparing it to international football, they might only have 5 or 6 weeks. So you really are building fitness as you go in global football. In AFL, you have the ability over 16 weeks to really develop a great fitness base, and fitness is probably a bit too simple, but it's genuine sort of robustness and resilience. And then you just chip away at it in gameplay. You don't train much in season, believe it or not. You might only have 1 or arguably 2 main sessions a week. You're certainly in most days, but it's not like other sports where they train a lot to maintain the fitness. We rely on the games, of which, in the games, players are running at 140 to 150 meters per minute over a 2-hour period. So they're covering some distance. But that allows you to maintain that fitness for longer throughout a season. So my general philosophy is work their asses off in pre-season and then hold on like hell during season. To try and maintain that fitness throughout the season.
Some of the soccer coaches would give for those long pre-seasons, hey?
I know, yeah. I think you've also got the beauty of just industry experience as well, Darren. I mean, how many top flight jobs have you held in top flight teams as well? So you have that ability to see the peaks and troughs and work through them, and have had experienced losses and wins and the highs and lows, right? So how much does that kind of feed into what you're doing now? Do you feel quite steady? If you feel those peaks and those troughs, are you actually quite steady with emotions, or how does that land with you?
It's a good question, Warren, and probably in the last 5 or 6 years, something that I've noticed about myself is that you don't ride those highs and lows. It's great that the team is playing finals football this year, and the club hasn't played in finals since 2017, so it's been a long time. And I was fortunate enough only 4 years ago to be part of the Melbourne team that won the league for the first time in 57 years, and that's great. But that isn't the reason why we all do this. I do it to see the players develop and to see them achieve their goals. So if we win on the weekend, that's great. But just as importantly for me, if we lose, if we take the lessons from it. So if we get, I don't know, a couple of soft tissue injuries or a couple of bad losses, the players will hopefully notice no change in my sort of reaction or emotions, because, as you said, I've been lucky enough to be part of big games and big World Cups and things like that. So that your nearest loss is just around the corner and your nearest win is just around the corner, as long as you do things well. But I think it's a really important part of our roles is to not players want to know that you're supporting them, of course, but that emotion doesn't spill over too much on game day, or if there are a series of injuries or something like that, that you're not panicking.
You see it, don't you? I've seen it in some of my colleagues and peers, particular in my early days in football, I think, where people were so emotional, come back on the Monday and they'd lost and they'd be really down. but you need to be as neutral as possible to just do your job and essentially help the athletes get to where they need to be. And I guess
That's our role. Our role is not
yeah.
to be emotional on game day. Our role is to help the athletes and provide the coaches with the best possible chance of winning. So as long as you understand that your role is not to get emotionally involved, then I think you'll be okay.
Have you found that changes from sport to sport? And have you found any kind of key wins from other sports that you brought across through to AFL, for example, from football, from NHL, etc.?
Yeah, I guess one of the things with being around a lot is not only do you see different things in your job, but also you get to talk to a lot of people at conferences and events, and I learn as much from that side of thing as I do from reading books and looking at YouTube videos. And I certainly you steal a lot of stuff and you employ a lot of stuff. So I guess the best example I can give you is when I arrived at Liverpool in middle of 2010. Players were training every single day. I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with people from Team Sky cycling and just saw what the human body is capable of. And you come back to AFL, and I mentioned before that there's only one main training session a week, and you just think, hang on, we can do more here. And probably in that 2013 season, when I'd come back from my stint in the Premier League, and not just from what I learned at Liverpool, but through spending a lot of time, like I said, with other sports, that if you build up the load correctly, the human body is capable of so much more than perhaps what we think it is. And as international football, as a good example, it's you're not a football person, so you wouldn't understand. Like, well, what you do understand is that Tour de France cyclists for 3 weeks put themselves through an amazing amount of load, and they're able to back it up. Cirque du Soleil athletes compete 325 sessions a year, and they're able to do it each week. Oh no, but this is football, it's different. It is not. It's not different. If you can build up that load and get players comfortable with that load, as long as you don't spike it too much or dip it too much. So that's probably the biggest thing that I brought back with me maybe 10 years ago, and was able to convince our players that the mental aspect is just as important, and if you believe in what you're doing, it'll take you a long way. And like I said, I think I used to use the term all the time: you can run more than you think you can.
I think in my experience of working in and around top flight soccer, I think sports scientists got a bit of a bad reputation for a period of trying to wrap players up in cotton wool, didn't they? Of almost sort of overprotecting them because they were trying to preserve them, but then they weren't actually bringing about any adaptation. And I think what you're saying there is spot on. And it's interesting that you mentioned Team Sky, and I wouldn't say this directly to our ex-colleague, Professor James Morton, but maybe sports like cycling are a little bit easier because the nature of them is a bit more linear physiologically. So AFL is obviously like really broad, isn't it? So you've mentioned that you use the matches for training, and maybe that is the answer to this question. But when you're looking at speed, endurance, collision production, and collision absorption, how do you factor in those quite different physical attributes in the training?
Yeah, it's I'm certainly not suggesting that the Tour de France cyclists go and play AFL and adapt pretty quickly because they'd get found out. So it's all about how you build up to the load, in my view. And as long as you progress, whether it's tackling, whether it's speed, whether it's agility. So let's take agility as an example. If players have done an off season where they haven't done much agility and they've just done some running, which is common maybe 10 years ago. These days it's a bit more combined, but you can't put them straight into some hard cutting and hard decel and accel because you're just waiting for a pubic overload to happen or a soft tissue injury to happen. So it is literally all about, okay, we'll add 10% this week and then 10% the next week and then 10% the next week. It's the same with contact progressions. How can we progress this contact so that when round one comes, the players are ready to absorb, 30, 40, 50 hard tackles in a game? And so it's just building that up, getting to a point where you're overloading it by 10 or 20% so that the game feels pretty easy, and then tapering off. So it is it's hard to do them all at once because you do need speed, you do need endurance, you do need agility, all of those things. And that's probably where the skill, because anybody can get, I believe anyway, I can go and get myself aerobically fit, but trying to have speed and agility and power and all at the right time is the art of it, I guess.
Yeah, they're such round athletes, aren't they? The engine on them, the physical mass qualities like that is crazy watching them play.
They're the most rounded athletes on the planet in terms of what the game demands of them. It's only getting faster and faster. So it really is a unique sport in that way.
Darren, we've spoken quite a bit about scheduling and how much work has to go into things. You don't operate in a small country. Travel must be a pretty big part of your operation and of your thinking, and that's similar for a lot of American sports as well. Obviously, they're all over the place, and Warren, our founder's got more air miles than most as well. So, have you got any tips? What's your scheduling considerations when you're trying to factor in travel as well?
Yeah, I guess there's a range of different factors. One is access to facilities when you arrive there. We choose hotels that have the appropriate recovery facilities for us. The second one is because we only, although Australia is a big country, the biggest time difference is only 3 hours. We tend to stay on our original time zone, no matter where we go. So whether that's dinner a bit earlier or a bit later, bedtime a bit earlier, a bit later, training times. The other thing that we've done this year, which we haven't done in any previous years, so maybe this is the secret sauce, is we train at the same time that we play in local time. So if, for example, we are playing in Perth at 3 p.m., we train in Adelaide. Our main training session in Adelaide will be at 12 p.m. Adelaide time, which is 3 p.m. Perth time. So yeah, sorry, 6 p.m. Adelaide time. I'll get that right. Yeah, so we make sure we have the players go through, get their circadian rhythm at the exact same spot, and just make sure that everything is the chance is taken out of it, and players are aware of what they're going to feel on match day. And that's been a substantial change because you can imagine we used to always have main training 10 a.m. Then gym following it, and everybody knew what to expect. And so whether it's the commercial part of the club, whether it's the membership part, whether it's the media, everybody has had to adjust their schedule. So tomorrow night, we're playing a really big game, a second final, elimination final against Hawthorn on Friday night. It's now Monday night. This time, and it's at 7:30 kickoff, I guess. So we'll be training at 7:30 on Tuesday night to get the players used to what they'll be experiencing.
That's really, really insightful. And I've actually seen a little bit kind of the latter end of my career and more now. People are looking more at circadian rhythms and how to manipulate it to allow the athletes to perform at their peak, right? What is the data telling us objectively on that? Or is it still kind of based on circadian rhythm research that we're inferring from? Or is there actual objective data on that?
Yeah, so a guy by the name of Sam Janetsky, who completed his PhD with me using Apple Watches. So we've set up something similar to what we had at John Moores, and where we've got our third PhD student through. We had all the players wear Apple Watches throughout pre-season, in-season, and we had some amazing data on the impact of sleep when they went to sleep, deep versus normal sleep, heart rate variability, a whole range of different factors, and its impact on performance. And unsurprisingly, it showed that there's an individual sort of circadian rhythm, but there's a group circadian rhythm when you would think the players are out there.
Okay.
And so it was, I think it's easy for people to say, just sleep more and you'll be fine. But getting players to sleep, and I know there's a really cool term which sounds a bit wanky, but sleep hygiene, and getting players to go through a sleep routine really helped out a lot. And when they could see it with the Apple Watch, and they could see their own data, and they could actually, do you know what, when I have a sauna, or when I do, I'm giving a shameless plug on the Hytro, but when I use the Hytro pants, I actually sleep a bit better. When all of those things happen, you can actually see it objectively. There's we went through a systematic year-long education process of the players 2 years ago, and now they do it themselves. Now they educate themselves, they check their watch. I get text messages from players 2 or 3 times a week, different players saying, can you just jump on and have a look at my sleep? Here's my password, and tell me if this is what I'm seeing. it's not just sleep. I don't want to just want people to think it's just sleep, but their general recovery and readiness. We use a really cool app that an Australian developer developed called Eclipse, which uh, combines their respiration rate, their heart rate variability, their morning waking heart rate, and all those sorts of things to produce a recovery metric. And we use that for a whole range of things. So, yeah, that's how we try and objectify it and use the data with our group.
That's music to my ears as well regarding all of your kind of recovery suite, but particularly obviously you're using Hytro for recovery and seeing it objectively in the data that perhaps the HRV is improved or whatever the metric is. So Tom and I actually were recently over in Whoop headquarters over in Boston, and we were looking at the impact of using Hytro BFR on HRV kinetics, on sleep quality. And it was super interesting. We're crunching the data now, but we believe we're seeing an impact from using BFR on HRV kinetics, which obviously has a huge carryover impact into sports, particularly teams like you who are using it for recovery. So yeah, I
Yeah,
guess, yeah. Just how are you using the Hytro shorts for recovery? Because I know you guys have used it all season, right?
we have, yeah. So we use it in two ways. One is with injured players, and we use that a lot with injured players in the gym for hypertrophy and strength development. And we use it in the way in which most people use BFR, and that's to overload the system for a similar sort of cost. And when I explain it to players, I liken it to sort of altitude training or heat training. You're doing the same amount of work, but your body is adapting a whole lot more. And that's transferred this year to recovery. So after games, we have a sort of recovery matrix of all the usual sort of things, but we've added into that Hytro. So players, AFL is a bit unique in a whole bunch of different ways, and one of them is after games, the family are allowed into the change rooms, and the media are in the change room. So it's quite a unique environment. And by law, and when I say law, the AFL law, we've got to give the players, the media, 8 or 9 minutes to access to the players after a game. Now, when you lose, there's no one in your room, so you can do what you want with the players. But when you win, it's mayhem, and there's 5 cameras and family members. And luckily for us, we've won the most amount of games the club has ever done in its history. So it's meant that there's this sort of 10-minute period after games where you're not getting any recovery into the players. So what we do now is the players go into their locker room. They've all got Hytro shorts, and they go through a pretty basic, I guess, flushing recovery protocol. And yeah, so while they're walking around, they're actually getting some recovery. Some of them choose not to and just choose not to, walk around the rooms and just sit in their locker, checking their phones or whatever they're doing. And then we start the cold and stretching and all the rest of the stuff. So when we travel, the players are all given a Hytro for either the bus or the plane or both, depending on how long the travel is. And so, as you know, players, all of us, love passive forms of exercise, and Hytro is certainly that. So they can be sitting there on the bus or on the plane and wearing the shorts and getting a benefit out of it.
I think that's a really beautiful illustration of kind of the benefits that's unlocked by a product like Hytro. That's normally dead time in inverted commas when the cameras are in your face and you're signing jerseys and speaking to the manager. But actually, all you need to do is pop them on and strap in. And that's really what we're seeing in the industry now is just people finding new and novel ways to integrate something like BFR into their existing program without taking up additional time. The science is almost ticked and thrown away. It's like we know it works. How can we implement it in what we do currently in practice? So it's so cool to hear how you're using it.
Yeah, it's if you liken it to sleep, and I'm not saying that the two are the same, but and people say, well, we know that sleep's important, so how do we get more sleep into our routine? And um, it might well be that doing that means you change your daily training schedule. Now, we've done that, and one of the massive benefits has been the increased sleep that the players have got. But there's a cost to it, which is everybody else has to change their schedule, staff, other aspects of the club that we spoke about before. We're starting way later, and we're doing that because we think sleep is important. We're doing the altered recovery post games because we think the BFR has a benefit in that. So we've made some slight changes to our schedule because we think it has a benefit. So, in a similar way as you might alter your sleep schedule, it's are you prepared to make those really small changes, which is pretty minuscule compared to changing your schedule, because it's just encouraging players to put the pants on and give them a try, and almost universally they've come back and said, we feel a whole lot better.
And I just asked Darren, you mentioned they're encouraging the players, and sometimes that can be quite challenging, either because they have like traditions or they don't want to know, they don't want to know, for example. But so with Hytro, but with anything really, what would you do in trying to get that buy-in from players if you wanted them to try something new?
I reckon one of the biggest mistakes we practitioners make is, well, there's many that we make and there's many that I've made, but firstly, you try and get too close to the players, and perhaps think that that's the way to get them to do what you want. But then what that allows you to do, or leads you into doing, is when you're asking them to doing something that they don't want to do, it's a little bit harder when they're your mate. So what I've learnt, I guess, over trial and error, and plenty of errors, is the education aspect, Tom. That is the number one thing. And so if I get up in front of the players, which I have done, and spoke about A, wearing an Apple Watch, B, using Hytro shorts, C, the benefits of cryo, it doesn't matter how much of an imposition the players will, as long as they trust you and you're using science and you're not talking crap to them. I was going to swear, but I'm not sure if I can on the podcast. And you're not talking shit to them. What player in their right mind is not going to think, hang on, this can actually help me either A, win more, B, earn more money, C, have a longer career, whatever they're motivated by. But I've found anyway, it is only through education. So we have, like I said, with the Apple Watch and the sleep, implemented a really systematic education process where, if it's not me, it's one of my staff getting up and talking about the Hytro shorts. This is, excuse me, how it works. This is the science behind it. Here is some vision of other athletes, and we use the Atlanta Falcons and other athletes using it. This is not just something that we've made up. This has been around for a while, so it's only through education. And fortunately, in Australia, the AFL teams are fantastic. They really do buy in.
And that's fascinating, isn't it? Because I think professional sports people actually get a bit of a bad rep as sort of being perhaps not the brightest buttons, and I guess some of them aren't. But like anything. But I think on the whole, they are really receptive, and if you can make a good case, in my experience, then they are open to trying things. And I thought it was really interesting what you said about not trying to be their mate. Something I'm really interested in and passionate about is developing young practitioners, and we will talk typically about sort of building rapport. And I don't think you're not saying that, but that's really interesting, that like that rapport doesn't mean, oh, they're your mate, so they'll do anything for you. It means sort of striking the right balance, doesn't it? To have that sense of authority in their mind, but also it's not just a sort of, you're not too chummy with them. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I've made that mistake. I went from a part-time job, and there was in one of my first clubs, and there was a full-time job available. This is in the Sydney Swans in 1999, so a while ago now. And the boss quite rightly said, "No, you're too close to the players." And I thought, how cool is this? I'm going out with the players, I'm having a beer with them. This is so cool. Look at me. And he just said, "You're too close to them. They're not going to respect you when you." And at the time, I thought, no, that's harsh. Like they love me. Of course, they love me. Look, I go out with them.
Yeah.
So it's a real trap that you can fall into, and I'm not saying at all that you don't have rapport, like you said, but it's you need to be respected first, and then if they want to like you, that's okay.
There's a term that I've been using a lot recently, and it's meeting the athlete where they're at. So you can have all the science you want and all the experience you want. If you're not, connecting the dots for the athlete, it's all pointless. So something we found really successful, particularly with Hytro, but with other techniques as well, is habit stacking or anchoring a behavior. So just as a quick example, and I'd love to hear some examples from yourself, Darren, but we've you have a recovery shake post game, you've got your glucose, your proteins in there, and then you might do your Hytro. And what we ask coaches to do is ask the athletes how they felt when delivering the BFR strap, that flushing feeling, and then anchoring that to the recovery shake and stating, well, that feeling you just experienced was your shake essentially being driven into your tissues. And all of a sudden, you've got two things that are separated that are connected. So whenever they now do a recovery shake, they're like, oh, I better use the Hytro shorts because I felt it working. You've now psychologically embedded and anchored a behavior with something they already do. Therefore, they understand a bit better why they're doing it, and you've got the buy-in. So, is there anything like that that you've perhaps used as a technique, maybe not even with Hytro, with other devices, just curiously to drive behavior change?
Yeah, I guess with something like cryo and sauna, what we try and do is give them a day in the week. This is when you do sauna, this is when you do cryo, this is when you do hot cold. And I speak to them about, okay, straight after a game, you need to get rid of some of the, some of the metabolites that are in your system.
Yeah.
A day before a game, we want a hormonal spike, so cryo is a great option for 24 hours before the game. So 2 days out for the game, we want hot cold. Straight after the game, we want ice baths and we want Hytro. And so what we try and do is for each player say, okay, this is when you talk about habit stacking, this is your recovery session that you're doing today. And what we say to the players, particularly in AFL, and it's finals time now, and everybody's played 25, 26 weeks, and so it really is a survival of the fittest type scenario. They are looking for ways to get that extra 5%, and so Warren, your week might look a little bit different to yours, Tom. A, because of how many minutes you've played, B, because of the position, C, because of your location in the city. I'm not going to get you to drive 45 minutes to the nearest cryo. So in that case, you can just do an ice bath. All of those sorts of things come into it. So rather than habit stacking one straight away to the other, what I ask the players is, you see that flotation session, that is a session. That is your session for the day. You're giving back to your body so that they don't think, a session must be lifting heavy things or running really fast. No, this time of year, that is your session. So we certainly have those conversations all the time.
It's that periodized model, isn't it? It's showing them that you're thinking through the science and delivering something specific and novel to them, I guess, which is super useful. And again, bringing this back to kind of the BFR conversation, we found that it's super helpful having a product that you can throw in on top of other things without adding time. So if you do a bike flush, you could throw on some BFR. If you're doing a stretching, mobilizing, even ice baths, right, or contrast. So have you done any of this with the BFR shorts? I know you do the passive and the walking, but what else are you implementing?
Yeah, we're certainly doing the ice baths with the BFR shorts, and we found that's been a really successful, I guess, habit stack there. Now, some players, ice baths are an interesting one because although we make it compulsory, there's probably two or three players that don't, and they have demonstrated that the 10 steps that they take from their locker room to the ice bars are the 10 most stressful steps of their life. And when you're aiming to recover, that sort of fight or flight response that's going on is kind of useless then. But we certainly have combined Hytro. We do. There's about 4 of our players that use them for a pre-game sort of activation to enhance. And they're guys that have experienced mainly patella tendon or issues with the shorts. So we have guys who we put through a protocol pre-game as well. So yeah, we and as I mentioned at the start of the podcast, we do a lot with our injured players. So essentially, we have a floating pair of about 6 different shorts that are passed around to our injured players. When you have sort of 50 player squads, there's always 4 or 5 that are injured, and they go through both aerobic activity as well as strength activity, depending on the limb that's injured, depending on what's going on with the BFR.
Yeah, makes total sense. So Darren, looking ahead, have you seen anything in the research or the industry or just kind of trends at the moment that you think are going to pick up, perhaps in recovery or performance as we go through the next few years? You've got the hindsight of many years in industry and you see things come and go. Is there anything at the moment that you think is looking on the rise?
I think the biggest thing that I've learned in the last 5 or 6 years is how we can influence. Well, there's probably two things. One is how we can influence the mindset of the players as practitioners, and that's obviously completely separate in a lot of ways to what we were taught to do. Because I remember going to one of Australia's leading horse trainers, and they had a human physiologist working with the horses, and he just looked at me and said, "Why would you work with humans? They think too much. Just work with horses. You just put a program together, and they respond because they just love running, whereas we think too much." And I sort of ignored him at the time, but because that was maybe 15 years ago. But now I realise that if you can get the players to buy into what you're doing, which is why I'll say, use the term again, passive techniques are so good. Even though the science is not amazing behind something like massage, players love it because it's passive and it feels good. With BFR, the science is not just emerging anymore. Like you said, we can lock that away. We know it works, and because it is so passive, it's a bit of a no-brainer, and it helps in that belief that you're trying to provide for the players. So there's certainly that, and then there is the uh, the other 20 hours that you don't spend with the players. How can you influence that? And that's probably the biggest thing. We have our players, from sleeping with certain mattresses to, like I said, to wearing Apple Watches 24/7 or Whoop or Oura Ring or whatever your poison is. So yeah, I think that is going to be the big space. It's a big space for people like us who are either ex-athletes or me, certainly not good enough, wearing things like Apple Watches to monitor myself. So I think getting players to wear that, it's not always easy. I tried to do this at Arsenal, but unless it was an IWC or a Rolex, they weren't interested in wearing, Apple Watches. But
Collaboration. Yeah.
yeah, but
Collaboration.
getting AFL players to put Apple Watches on was a whole lot easier. And but yeah, I think that's the big area that we need to we ought to be looking at, is how that the other 20 hours is affecting the performance.
I think that other 20 hours is huge, isn't it? I mean, for a start, it's by far the biggest part of the day. You're not with them a lot more than you're with them. And I don't love the word, but we hear a lot about culture, don't we? And what do you think a winning culture? Have seen a really successful season so far, and it sounds like what you've just said there is about creating that kind of a culture to trust the players a bit and give them a bit of autonomy, perhaps. But what does a winning culture look like for you? And how have you gone toward building that with the Crows?
Yeah, great question. And it's initially you kind of have to hand feed the players, and you have to say, right, I want you all to meet at the beach 10 o'clock after the game, and this is the session that you're going to do, and you might turn up, you might not, but more often than not, you'll turn up to make sure. But nowadays, I don't have to do that because the leading players are driving that. If we're playing in heat, we might put the players through a heat protocol. I don't have to, I can just WhatsApp the playing group and say, this is what I want you to do. And so is that good culture? What it is, or how it came to be that way, is through the education, the targeting of the leaders, to make sure that they can, because they've got way more influence in the dressing room than I'll ever have. So making sure that they're on board, and within a club, I always use the example, because I'm a mad, soccer is my sport, and I grew up as despite the jerseys on my wall there, I grew up as a Manchester United fan.
Oh, really?
And I just thought it was amazing how Sir Alex Ferguson, they got rid of Ronaldo, win the league the next year, got rid of Van Nistelrooy, win the league the next year, got rid of Beckham, win the league the next year. And so whenever coaches say, oh, but we can't afford to lose, Warren Bradley is our best player, history shows that if you create the best culture, you'll be okay. And so it's a long process. It won't happen easily, but you have to choose the right players as well. There's no way, some of the players that I've had to work with in the past, there's no way I could trust them to do something by themselves. But this group, you certainly can, and it has been a 4-year process.
Just to be a little bit critical, if I may. I mean, you say that you don't have to turn up at those sessions and you know that they're getting done. it's everything's easier when you're winning, right? Was it like that when things weren't going so well? And how do
Yeah.
you make that happen when things aren't going so well?
No, it's a really fair point. And in my first couple of years, when we were losing games, and I didn't know slash trust the playing group, it honestly, Tom, it is a very thorough and systematic education process. That's what it is, both at an individual and team level. Now, other people listening to this might say, "Yeah, I did it this way, I did that way." This is the only way I know how to do it is to. And now I was lucky with this group of players because I just literally walked out of a team that won the league and won everything, first time in 57 years. So I go into the team literally who was coming last. They came last year before, so from first to last. And so they were probably ready to listen to maybe what might have helped the team win. But we had a really good group. Certainly the staff that were there before me were excellent as well. So they'd laid some great foundations. But the only way you can get it is, in my opinion, is through education and targeting the right people in the group. Like it really is, not all of them are the captains, but they're the most influential, the most vocal in the dressing room. And if you can get them on board, I've had more dinners with 18-year-old players than I have in the rest than I can remember because I'm trying to get to know them and what makes them tick. And I don't have much in common with your average 18-year-old, but you try and find that common ground and find that way to get them to believe in what you're saying and to understand what motivates them. And then you can work on that education process.
Yeah, so you can't just flick the switch, can you? It requires a bit of patience and bit by bitting it.
And I think that's the other thing too, Tom. Often I'll spend 2 hours in my office talking to three different players, and it might be about the NBA or the NFL, or it might be about the latest Premier League results. And did I tell you about the time when I was trying to get, player A up for a game, an FA Cup final or whatever? And at the end of that 2 hours, I'm like, oh, I've got none of my monitoring done. I've got none, but that's actually work. You're investing in those players, and you'll find that the next day you get in front of them and say, what I want you to do is do some Hytro, some hot, cold, some this sort of stuff. They just go straight into it.
Yeah. It's the human side of sport, isn't it? And I've seen this kind of move towards more subjectivity as well. So you mentioned before, if they feel like a massage is working, then it's working because they feel better. And it's all tied into the same ethos, isn't it? That human first approach, allowing autonomy for that athlete to do what they want to do because they feel it works. And we see a lot of that now, again, with the application of BFR, I guess. It's the science is great. Let's throw it to the side. It's do you feel better? And if you don't do it. If you do,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. Now implement it where you want to use it because it makes sense. But yeah, that human side is so important. And a final round off point on that is I left sports about 7 years ago now, and we were getting to this peak of just data, just paralysis by analysis, I like to say. And I think we've come through that now and we're starting to use meaningful data points. But are you still seeing that in the industry, or is it more moving toward the subjective side and more, player feel?
Yeah, I fear that we're not moving far enough. I liken it as sort of guardrails, and when you're just first learning 10-pin bowling and you've got those bumpers either side of you. We go this way too much, and we rely on data too much, which in the era of acute chronic fatigue and the papers that were produced, they were never meant to be this absolute figure, but people were taking people out of training if their acute chronic was above 1.5, and it was never meant to be that way. But we as sports scientists, as you mentioned earlier, Tom, we probably did ourselves a disservice by taking players out of training. Like, hang on, he hasn't missed a session in 5 weeks. Yeah, but his acute chronic ratio is too high, and the paper produced by no. And then you go the other way and you let players who are either inexperienced or ill-intentioned have their own way, and they're going to choose the most passive, the most easiest, the path of least resistance. So you've just got to keep the bumpers, the guardrails straight, and keeping people on the right path. And if the data gets too heavy, then just bring it back in a little bit. And if the players are taking the piss, then just bring them back a little bit. And it is very much an art. but I fear we're probably still too far down the data pathway. And people will always say, you go to every conference, and I've almost stopped going to them. Oh, yeah, this data helps me have a conversation. Very often, not the conversation is you are not training because your jump score is too low. And we have probably the most motivated group I've ever worked with the Crows, but I guarantee you 50% of them aren't going to their absolute maximum on a Monday after a Sunday game, and we're asking them to do some jump testing. So you just have to be a bit careful with how you're doing it. And like I said, just keep those guardrails up.
Fantastic. Darren, one last question for myself. I don't know if Tom wants to ask anything further, but very kind of agnostic of sport and just tapping into your expertise here. What's the one or couple of pieces of advice you would give to a young practitioner? We have a lot of young practitioners listening to this who would be very excited to hear your opinion. Is there any one, two, or maybe even three things that you would say at the start of your career, how to work in high performance sport effectively with your athletes?
Yeah, I'd be a generalist as much as possible. I think I was only talking to somebody yesterday morning, a 15-year-old who wanted to get into the industry, and he asked me the same question. And I said, don't just go down the data path or down the nutrition path or down the biomech path or down the strength path. Make sure you put yourself across the suite of services that we can offer. And the best way to do that as a young practitioner is to go and coach. When I say coach, I mean strength coach, athletics coach, performance coach, your own team. And that might be your sister's basketball team, or it might be, it's certainly for probably very little money or a tracksuit, and that's about it. But make mistakes getting in front of a group of people where it's not, a professional cycling team or a Formula One racer, or just understand the nuances of setting up your own session, how to deliver it, how to coach it, when players are not motivated, what to say when they are motivated, how to pull them back a little bit, get exposure to that as much as possible before you hit the big time. The best practitioners that I've seen are ones that have done hours and hours before they've first got the job at Liverpool, and there are people who go from an internship into a full-time job, and that's great, and they're fine, and they're very good at what they do. But if you stay at the one club in the one sport doing the one discipline, it will certainly have a ceiling on you, both emotionally and career-wise.
Yeah, makes total sense. Well, Darren, thank you so much for your time, buddy. It's always class to chat, and I love hearing insights about Hytro as well. You're used to the Crows, so hopefully we've got a few more years of great relationship building to do. So thank you again for your time, and have a wonderful evening.